possibility, but one thing that I'm always a little leery of is when players do too much transitioning on one base. They do a little bit too much of, it's, well, oh my god, okay, so I'm going to go 3 gateways, then I'm going to get Blink, then I'm going to get Dark Templar to harass them, but I want to make sure I have a drop ship. I want to get that robotics base, then I can get the Warp Prism to bring that in, and then I can warp in Dark Templar and Blink up, and then I'm going to get Colossi, because I already have the robotics facility, and then they're just mined out, and they have like 20 tech structures and like no units, and that's bad. So I'm always a little leery of this, oh, look what more I can do on one base. And it's kind of funny because a lot of Protoss vs. Protosses sort of degenerate to that, where most people are just like, well, I'm not expanding. Are you going to expand? I'm not going to expand. And it's kind of dumb. So we're going to take a look at a little bit longer of a game to see what Stalkers with Blink allow you to transition to. And excuse me, why this ends up working pretty nicely. And anytime you have a fun little tactic that you can think of, such as Stalkers with Blink will get me in there, or what are some other ones? Like a Hellion drop, so I can roast his workers in the back, or a Thor drop, or with Zerg, you can do some sort of tunneling claws bust with a whole bunch of roaches. Like anytime you think of these tactics, think of what is everything available to you once that tactic is sort of done. So the question that we're going to be asking ourselves in a little bit is, what is a good way to transition out of Stalkers with Blink? And to answer that, we're going to think about all the possible buildings that we have already made throughout the game and what we can do that makes a lot of sense. And we'll talk about that once we arrive at that point in the game. But here is Melon spawning in a very melony color. So that's very excellent by him. Don't know if this was by choice or by coincidence, but either way, it is indubitably awesome. There's the gateway going down. It's a 13 gateway. What's the difference between a 10, 11, 13, 14, 12 gateway? Not as important. Just note that 10 gateway is really fast Stalkers. 12, 13, 14-ish gateway is a little bit more economically focused Stalker stuff. So White Raw going gateway, getting his Vespian Geyser, getting a pylon, here comes a cybernetics core, excellent. Pretty typical stuff. Now, one thing that Melon did in this game, the point of this whole series is Stalkers with Blink, but I just want to briefly note that I think this is pretty cool what Melon did. For any of you who didn't see this, Melon waited until about 16 or 17 food and then double assimilated. People have been tending to go for one early assimilator, one kind of early assimilator, and I just think that this is an interesting little variation to get these 2 guys up very quickly. And then in the meantime, we see that Melon is getting a Zealot. I think that this pylon could have been skipped by Melon, so that way he could get a cybernetics core a little bit earlier. But I think that a lot of players are going to begin experimenting around with just economy timings later on, and there's going to be many different ways to go about it. I even know of the famous poker player Hevad Khan was actually saying that, especially when sentries used to do 8 damage, Hevad Khan would actually get 2 assimilators after his gateway and before the cybernetics core, because it was so easy to spend all his money on sentries, and that would end up putting him way ahead. Which is kind of a cool thought. But either way, I will neglect that for the time being and just come back to White Raw. What is he doing? Well, we're already starting to see some themes here. Oh, 1 pylon planted here, so that way he can reinforce when warp gates are up. A very fast Stalker. Is he getting warp gates yet? No, it doesn't look like he's getting warp gates yet, but remember in Game 1 how I said if you get a Stalker to your opponent's base, or even small numbers of Stalkers, you can do lots and lots of damage? Well, always poking with 1 Stalker can actually be pretty good. Looks like Melon is going to have more than enough stuff out in time to be able to deal with it. But remember, as long as White Raw pulls back... Okay, let's back up and pretend that White Raw wasn't getting attacked. As long as White Raw pulls back before he takes any main life damage, any damage to the hull, he's going to be fine, because shields recharge so fast in this game. Letting it get down to 18 life is not good. Don't do that. A little bit of a misstep, but either way. White Raw doing the normal stuff. Looks like he's opting for a Twilight Council before he gets any of these other unit-producing structures up. Oh, even before Warp Gate. Don't know if that's a mistake or not. Kind of feels like it was a little bit unintentional. But Twilight Council's a little bit early. We don't quite have the gas to get the Blink. But the point of this game, again, is what do we do after we get the Stalkers with Blink? What is the goal after we are able to do any sort of cool little harass. And Melon looks like he is doing some sort of big gateway robo facility style opening. That's pretty popular nowadays because you get that observer out so quickly, and also because any transition to Colossus is going to be a good one, because War of the Worlds was a sweet movie despite what other people say. So, more Stalkers getting produced, chrono boosting on the probes, chrono boosting on the Blink, and there's always a little bit of a problem at this point, where if you're playing on a map like Kulas, or excuse me, not Kulas Ravine, if you're playing on a map like Metalopolis, this map, what exactly do you do to blink up here? You kind of need a robotics facility to be able to do that. I mean, I'm actually trying to poke around here, trying to find... There's the Stalkers, yeah. Can't actually see them on the minimap. They're hidden under that white dot. But there always comes this little problem, like, oh god, yeah, how do I actually get up into his base once I have Stalkers with Blink? And was that a Blink attack? No, that wasn't a Blink attack. Just pretend for a moment, let's pretend that we had some Stalkers here, and all of a sudden we see an enemy Stalker wander right up here. We can just blink down and kill it really easily. Again, you can think of Blink as a nice little speed upgrade. It's amazing in these little tiny snipe attacks. So it forces your opponent to have a nice, huge, solid, gigantic ball. So White Rod's going to try to poke around here. You might say to yourself, well, you have to get a robotics facility if you want to do anything with Blink. In honesty, though, you can actually just get to the front of his ramp and then just blink up right here. That actually turns out to be a pretty damn effective way to get into your opponent's face and abuse this blink that you've researched. So it's pretty cool technique. But as we can pretty clearly see, White Rod's having a little bit of trouble getting up there. He's making another robotics facility, and this is where I kind of get a little bit, you know, I'm a little bit leery of too many transitions on one base. White Rod trying to poke in here. Force field's not going to be an issue whatsoever. We just blink on the other side of it. Again, we can be very aggressive, but kind of stalemate-ish. Melon can't really move down his ramp. He doesn't really want to move down his ramp. He is getting a good amount of Immortals to be able to deal with these Stalkers. White Rod doesn't really want to expand because this is a pretty scary force, and all the Blink Stalkers really let him do are harass and be a little bit aggressive. But here is a still very cool transition we're going to see White Rod do. So we're at this point where we have a lot of gateways, we have a Twilight Council. I'm going to ignore this robotics facility because basically it only gets used for observers, but just with this set of structures, what would be a really good transition? Well, as it turns out, just getting a whole bunch of speed zealots and getting the zealot charge upgrade. That turns out to work really nicely because, one, we have all these gateways up anyways, so we can just stop Starcraft production and begin making zealot production. We have this Twilight Council anyways, so we can begin researching that. And again, zealots are cheap, so we have a little bit of extra cash to start that. And because zealots are so cheap, we can eventually build up enough money to expand. Cool, right? Seems like a pretty nice, solid transition. I kind of personally dislike the fourth gateway that was added by White Rod. I kind of would preferred a robotics facility instead of that fourth gateway, so we can get the observer and do something with it. Or, you know, maybe not get the robotics facility at all, expand, and then get the robotics facility. I just think that fourth gateway was a little bit too early. But either way, getting these Zealots works marvelously because, again, Stalkers with Blink plus Zealots with Charge are a pretty damn good force. I mean, you're going to have pretty high numbers because you're so gateway-focused anyways, but it deals really nicely with these cutesy things that Protoss players will do, like getting a small force but some Colossi. You can blink up to the Colossi. Getting sentries with Force Field. You can blink over the sentries, and also the Zealots are kind of fast. Also, with your Zealots with speed, you can wrap around his Zealots really easily. There's a lot of nice advantages to having Blink and Charge. Probably the most significant one of which is that it just requires the same set of buildings. Warp Gates and a Twilight Council. So here comes the Observer, and here comes White Rod making many Zealots here. He probably will be expanding at some point in the future. We can already see, look at White Rod's food is just so way high because the Zealots are cheap, they're 2 food, so he's going to be able to get a pretty damn decent force soon. Melon's doing something that I would call a little bit typical. I don't think it's the most efficient way to play with 4 Warp Gates and a robotics facility making stuff, but it definitely means that Melon will be having a very strong one-base army, which is, again, becoming increasingly popular in this matchup. So now, after the latest observer in the world, White Raw will be able to blink here. He's killing off this Stalker pretty easily. And, you know, I said this at the start, but I want you just to note how fast Stalkers are and how easy it is to micro them against these Zealots. Look at this, really not taking any damage, doing some fancy blink stuff. And this is a pretty damn good attack. I mean, it's always pretty funny when you're probably right about now, because if you're White Raw, you're just like, uh-oh, where do I go? Kind of losing a lot, especially marching directly into that Immortal, but hey, some Zealots going to kill those off. Be a little bit careful with the Stalkers with Blink. I kind of think that if you blinked up here, White Raw should have stayed in this general area, picked off a lot of Zealots, and then